It's Furzy. It's Toolsy. Todd, I've reached my limit of talking about Bo Bichette with no news. Give me something.
I don't have any Bo Bichette news. I figured you were going to come on to this fine program, Toolsy, and break the news about Kyle Tucker either signing a long-term deal with the Jays for 9-10 years at about $40 million a pop, or taking the $50+ million that Steve Cohen has allegedly offered him for a shorter term to be a member of the New York Metropolitans. But I think this is where we are at this point in the season, about a month away from pitchers and catchers reporting during the hot stove, that when Bo Bichette is daily news and you're on Bo Bichette watch, it is more pronounced now in the month of January than it was day to day trying to figure out if he was going to be available for the ALDS or the World Series roster.
So the Tucker news is the Mets supposedly a 1-year deal for 50. Is this correct? And if so, I am jumping at that knowing I'm going to get a long-term deal after that. Take the 50.
That's what they're saying, that they've gone back and forth, 1 year for 50, 3 years in the high 40s. I'm right there with you. If you're betting on yourself, why not take the massive payday now, hoping that you can secure a longer term deal at the end? Or you know what? Drive them up to $60 million a pop, 3 years, and go, I'm done. 32 years old, I'm done with professional baseball. I want to enjoy other pursuits. But it is amazing that this is where we are with a player of Kyle Tucker's stature. Look, he's good at the dish. There is no doubt about it. But to think about paying him between $50 and $60 million a year, baseball has officially lost its mind. And would it shock anybody if we had a labor stoppage coming up with these contracts continuing to escalate?
I would do the 50 for 1 year and then also announce this is my last year in baseball.
I mean, maybe you can try and negotiate an equity stake in the casino and entertainment project that's going to be built right outside of Citi Field. I mean, you have to diversify that portfolio as a ball player that's 29, entering the downside of your career, apparently, since I hear the physical peak comes at 27. I'm still waiting for mine, Toolsy, but maybe mine will hit at 47 instead.
Hey, speaking of baseball parks, I keep seeing renderings of the A's facility, and it looks very futuristic. Have any shovels gone into the ground in Vegas?
They have started to put some shovels in the ground and start the construction project here. I actually know the real estate development company that's been contacted to kind of help them design what they're going to call a promenade or an entertainment district, which in this town feels a little bit ironic because every corner is its own entertainment district. But I think what's interesting, every time you see the renderings of how this ballpark is going to look with the Vegas skyline, on what was the former site of the Tropicana Hotel and Casino, of casino fame and a variety of others. Jay, Toolsy, you look, there's so many bodies in the building. We know that is a futuristic and made up rendering for the Las Vegas Athletics, who, by the way, the best story, and I'm not sure if you follow this at all, there are trademark issues going on that the A's may not be able to call themselves the Las Vegas Athletics and may have to change their name. If that's not the most A's storyline, I'm not sure what is. Kudos to the Fisher family for being buttoned up as always.
Couldn't they be the Las Vegas Aces?
The Aces is going to be tough. You have a WNBA team who's won more championships than even the Vegas Golden Knights have during their time here. And you also have the Arizona Diamondbacks AAA affiliate up in Northern Nevada in Reno that are the Aces. So I think that is going to be a very difficult sell. But look, there's so many other ways to try and tap into the gambling stuff. Maybe they pirate the name away from one of the CFL's greatest franchises in the Ottawa Redblacks and claim that's an homage to the roulette wheel.
I love it. By the way, it wasn't lost upon me that you almost called me Jay earlier. Don't worry. Jay and I are at the stage in our lives where we've been called each other's names a million times. I take zero offense to it.
Hey, look, it's a greatest sign of flattery for the two of you that are able to imitate one another's crafts, and knowing that you two were attached at the hip for all those years, including our quality time in Los Angeles.
We sure are. You are wearing the Vegas jacket for a reason. You and our good friend Kyle are going to the Leafs and Knights. You are going to spend a night with Kyle. You're going to spend a night watching Mitch Marner face his former team.
I am, and I'm excited about watching the reception, so to speak. Although, of course, Mitch Marner playing a home game a little bit different than the dynamic going back to Toronto. I just am trying to mentally prepare myself, Toolsy, for what I can expect for a night with Kyle? Is he going to be an obnoxious Leafs fan? Is he going to get thrown out? Do I have to make sure that he gets the Elaine Bennis treatment, sitting in my season ticket holder spot so I don't alienate the rest of my fellow Knights fans? And also keep in mind, this jacket, by the way, is a throwback to year 3 for the Golden Knights. It was a season ticket member gift. What you can't feel, though, through the screen is that if you were to light a match anywhere near this jacket, I would go up in flames in about 6.3 seconds.
Oh, you got it from Temu then.
Oh, I'm not even sure it's from Temu. This may be from a knockoff Temu because I've had it on for about 4 minutes and I'm sweating bullets, much like I'm wearing one of those sauna suits that you can pick up for $9 if you're on a weight loss program.
I know what Kyle will be doing, in which every Canadian hockey fan that watches a game in Vegas does. You watch the spectacle, you watch the pregame theatrics, and you say to yourself, this is cheesy as hell, but it's entertainment. And hey, you got my attention.
Look, that is one thing that Bill Foley and the rest of the Knights organization have placed an emphasis on with the pregame festivities. They continue to want to try and make it a show. There's so many different ways to spend your entertainment dollar out here in Las Vegas. And for a crowd that's primarily locals on a night in, night out basis, although there'll be plenty of Torontonians that'll be in attendance for a long weekend, watch a little NFL football as well, that it's one of the things that they've truly prided themselves on. I just want to make sure that Kyle's ready to walk into a building where there's actual atmosphere at puck drop and people that make noise instead of being surrounded by all the suits that attend those Leafs games.
So the Maple Leafs currently have their hands on a playoff spot, something that has been very hard to come by for this team this year. And the Buffalo Sabres right behind them. So you've got a backlog of teams. Of these teams that are fighting for the final playoff spot, who is not making it? Todd. Like I called you someone else.
Turnabout's fair play. Turnabout's fair play.
Bruins. Okay, you got to pick a few of these. Bruins, Leafs, Sabres, Flyers, Penguins, Panthers. Who is not making the playoffs of that group?
So I'm going to say that the Bruins and Flyers are on the outside looking in from that particular group. I think the Penguins are a little bit more tenuous. We'll see how they can handle the Erik Karlsson injury on the back end. They've kind of exceeded their metrics. This is a Flyers team that I think when you look at the schedule congestion we're going to see coming down the stretch, have real concerns. I didn't think we'd be sitting here in early 2026 saying that the drop-off from Dan Vladar to Samuel Ersson is pretty pronounced, but that's exactly what's happened. While the Flyers have bought into Rick Tocchet's brand of hockey, I always worry about this team's ability to score on a night-in, night-out basis and where the offensive contributions are going to come from. The Bruins, meanwhile, look, Jonas Korpisalo has kind of stabilized the backup netminder position. Jeremy Swayman coming in with back-to-back shutouts. But this is another team. You look at that roster after the top 6, and I have legitimate concerns about where some of that depth production is going to come from. We've already seen Morgan Geekie's shot percentage and shooting percentage, I should say, that was completely unsustainable start to tick back to a little bit of reality. I just can't buy into this Bruins group. And I think the team that everyone is most fascinating to see what they can look like if they're able to get healthy would, of course, be the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers, who are going to need better play from Sergei Bobrovsky between the pipes. And they're going to need Brad Marchand. They're going to need Matthew Tkachuk. They're going to need Seth Jones all back in the fold. But Paul Maurice and this team has been here and done that in the past. I don't think you officially write off Florida until they're mathematically eliminated. And the Sabres, do I think they're going to get in? Flip a coin. But from a pure nostalgia standpoint and feel-good story for the 2025-2026 season, it would be great to see this team end a 14-year postseason drought behind the strength of Tage Thompson up front and Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen between the pipes, given the rotating situation that we have seen. Keep waiting for Devin Levi to kind of get his cup of tea at the NHL level. It hasn't happened yet, but Alex Lyon should be waiting in the wings to try and give them that formidable 1-2 punch.
In the NFL this weekend, should Bills fans be reading into the fact that the Bills have the early window game on Saturday? I would take offense. What, no one wants to watch my Bills?
I think it's a combination of factors. The league did no favors to the 49ers playing them in the late game on Saturday. Gave them a little bit longer in terms of overall rest, but I think when you're looking at the 2 number 1 seeds by default, the Denver Broncos kind of drew that proverbial Houston Texans slot, albeit a week later in the divisional round instead of wild card weekend. But I think the bigger question facing the Bills is how many healthy wide receivers are they going to have traveling to Mile High for this game? I mean, we know Khalil Shakir's a full go. Keon Coleman, relatively speaking. Brandon Cooks, they took out of the retirement home with a pretty good performance against Jacksonville. But you lose another one with Tyrell Shavers with a torn ACL. Joshua Palmer on season-ending IR. Curtis Samuel out. The list goes on and on. Dalton Kincaid was seen in a walking boot after the game against the Jags. Just such a tough, daunting task that the Bills have in front of them. But the odds makers still believe in them, and that's part of the reason that the Bills actually opened up as 1-point favorites before flipping to the Broncos, a modest 1-point home chalk at this point.
You mentioned the 49ers. They get the Saturday evening time slot against the Seahawks. Seahawks at home. That's a tough one.
It is, with additional rest, and the Seahawks in a little bit of a unique spot, having played the 49ers most recently, Week 18, having 2 weeks to prepare to take on the same opponent. The only thing that'll really change is that particular venue. At the same time, a little bit of optimism around the 49ers camp that maybe they get Ricky Pearsall back, who's been dealing with that knee injury. He is truly the one separator that they have in that receiving room that makes him a little bit more dynamic offensively. And it wouldn't come a moment too soon, knowing that George Kittle has been lost for the season with that torn Achilles. And defensively, I know it's early and it's all speculation, but Fred Warner, the leader of that linebacking core, logging a limited practice. We'll see if he's available in any capacity, whether it's situational pass rushing or just for emotional leadership. But, Toolsy, when we hear about the 49ers performance last weekend against the Eagles when they pulled off that upset, I think the biggest story was George Kittle. I mean, when owners are going down to the locker room and ask if George Kittle needs anything, he's asking for a bottle of Patron. He's polishing that off on its own. It almost feels like George Kittle would be a perfect member on the Fox lot, given the bosses that we used to work with.
Yeah, indeed. On Sunday, you got the Texans and Patriots. Patriots, they're rolling at the welcome mat for them to move on.
Be honest, how disgusted were you watching Sunday Night Football between the Patriots and Chargers, where it looked like it was setting football back 100 years, with both of those teams unable to complete a forward pass? Be honest with us, Toolsy.
I was more upset by the Niners-Eagles game. It was tough to watch.
I think some of these games, despite being as competitive as they've been, the 2 games on Saturday were entertaining as hell. Not as much as someone that bet the Green Bay Packers, watching them squander that 21-3 lead. But it definitely felt like a little bit more of a rock fight between the Eagles and 49ers, followed up by Justin Herbert, who was under constant duress right from the opening kickoff. If you're looking for points, though, I don't think Patriots-Texans is going to be the game that you really want to try and go to.
No, total's at 40.5.
Yeah, it's come down some. I actually bet the first half under at 20.5 myself. I think the Texans have to run the ball, have to limit the mistakes that C.J. Stroud can make. He was downright awful on Monday night against the Steelers. They won in spite of his performance, but don't tell C.J., who still ran his mouth to Steelers fans after turning the ball over what felt like 17 times. And we know the Texans are going to try and get after Drake May, doing it without blitzing. The key for them is to stay in their rush lanes and make sure that Drake May's legs don't become their Achilles heel, knowing how elusive he's been and what kind of luxury it is to have a quarterback that can extend plays and turns potential sacks into short or big plays as the situation calls for.
Is Rams-Bears the game of the weekend? And note the start time, 6:30. The guys pointed out that to me when before we came on. I'm like, that's a strange start time.
Yeah, a little bit of no man's land Sunday afternoon, and don't check the Mercury because the weather forecast in Chicago for that particular game won't do a whole lot of favors to the fans from Southern California, all 8 of them that I'm sure will make the trip to Soldier Field to see their team in person. It looks like we could have a weather in the single digits, maybe the low teens for that ball game, and it's part of the reason that you've seen a total that was as high as 51, 51.5 start ticking down into that 48, 48.5 range. But under perfect conditions, I mean, these two offenses should be able to absolutely cook against the defensive counterparts. This is a Rams secondary that leaves a lot to be desired. So we'll see if Ben Johnson trusts Caleb Williams to kind of start where he left off against the Green Bay Packers. And for Matthew Stafford, I think what we're going to figure out early on is how banged up that finger really is. I know the x-rays came back negative for the sprained finger on his throwing hand, but look, he didn't exactly have the same amount of zip or accuracy in the second half against the Panthers after he banged it into an opponent's elbow, or it looked to be, something that nicked it up pretty good late in that first half on last Saturday.
It doesn't take a very smart man to look at the remaining teams and realize the NFL front office is hoping for Bears-Bills Super Bowl.
Well, I think Bears Bills would definitely be a needle mover with two very prominent and starved fan bases. Of course, you have to go back to 1985 for the last time that the Bears were emblazoned on that Lombardi trophy, and the Bills still looking to try and get to the promised land and get that Holy Grail back to Western New York. So, to your point, I think as you go through the 8 teams that are there, that would be the most prominent matchup. Although, look, no one's going to argue if the 49ers, who travel extremely well along with the Seattle Seahawks, are well represented there. The Denver Broncos, a franchise with its own rich history. So the interesting part about it is when you go through the 8 remaining quarterbacks, last check, only one of them has a Super Bowl championship on his resume. That would be Matthew Stafford. So it'll be fascinating if the Rams were to get upset this weekend and we get to see a new name vying for the Lombardi trophy in Santa Clara about a month from now.
Doesn't matter who's in the Super Bowl, people still watch, but what would be the death matchup for the NFL? Texans, Rams?
Yeah, I think the Texans being involved in any capacity would be up there. And so I would say Texans, Rams, probably the matchup that the NFL brass does not want to see. The Texans of the 8 teams, probably the lowest level needle mover that's there. Not exactly a ton of household names on the offensive side that people get excited about for betting props. So I would think all 7 of the 8 teams can create a whole lot of buzz, storylines, and everything else. The Houston Texans would be the afterthought, and it would be the equivalent of an NHL Stanley Cup with the Carolina Hurricanes taking on the Calgary Flames or something to that extent.
What was the last horrible matchup? Was it Sabres Stars Stanley Cup final?
I mean, that's probably right up there. I'm trying to think. What did we get? We got an Oilers Canes matchup along the way, or was it?
Oh, I remember that one. Yep.
Yeah, was it that? I'm trying to remember which of the franchises from Alberta, but we get a lot of those in the Stanley Cup playoffs, more so than we do in the Super Bowl. Like you said, everybody will watch the Super Bowl no matter what. The same cannot be said for a best-of-7 series with a couple of afterthought franchises. And look, I root for one out here in the desert that doesn't exactly move the needle on a national basis, both domestically or abroad.
The one thing I'm not looking forward to, well, I'm looking forward to the halftime performance of Bad Bunny. But the comments, I am going to throw my phone and computer into a lake because I don't want to see them.
You're probably better off that way. But as we know, or we're quickly learning around here, there are plenty of Americans, Toolsy, that haven't realized that Puerto Rico is part of this great country, but a different discussion for a different day, my friend.
That's right. Furzy, have a blast at the game. Make sure you buy Kyle all the souvenirs and make him look like the biggest Knights fan leaving that arena.
Hey, the biggest question I have, Dan, before we close up shop, if Kyle gets himself into trouble, do we bail him out with a proper Vegas-style bail bondsman, or do we let him, serve his time 12 to 18 hours in the drunk tank accordingly? If he has too many light domestic beers here in the States.
Oh, no, let him sit around. It'll be good to get the content for him to tell the story, to tell the tale.
Perfect. That's exactly what we need before he makes his next trip back to North Dakota.
Enjoy, my friend.